Get that, and all I'm saying is that I'm not convinced by this idea that there's inevitability. I think you have to balance. I think the notion of I think there is notions of societies that have said economic prosperity is everything, and other societies that have said economic prosperity can and sometimes is limited by certain realities, like that will cause a certain amount of suffering here or a certain amount of suffering there. I'm not suggesting, for example, that you shut every economic program down because it causes inevitable suffering, as you would say. But I do think that a lot of people, the biggest concern people have with the notion of transforming a society economically or in a communist or socialist way is that it leads to a period of repression and oppression. And I think if you can't address that question, not you personally, I'm saying one can't address that question, you really can't sell it to someone, because you know, what are you saying? We have to all live under a horrible dictatorship for 20 years, but we'll have to, you know, so you have to make the point that it's not going to happen.
The only way you can do that is to have a rational resolution to the question: one, what should be publicly owned and how should it be administered? Two, how do you democratically control the state and society in order to bring the maximum control by the population over administration and over power? And these are the great dilemmas of human history, telescoped within the sphere of this question of socialism, because democracy is a longer question than socialism. Democracy and misuse of power is a longer question than socialism. Some people go as extreme as to argue all throughout history the misuse of power is dominant. It's not true. Misuse of power has existed throughout history, but each time in a different form. We have to deal with the specific form we live under and resolve the question in relation to that. So, for example, answering the question, how do you administer a society under socialism, which is more free than capitalism, more democratic than capitalism, and more prosperous than capitalism? If you cannot answer that question, you inevitably will be rejected by the population. And so this is the dilemma for socialists. It's quite correct. It is, how do we organize production, distribution and exchange in the most democratic and most free form possible with the existing resources of mankind? And that depends on the country. The richer the country, the easier it is.
Regarding the point, this historical development that had to pass through chaotic death of
it's called primitive accumulation.
And in the Western world, for example, had to pass through destruction of not only land but people as well, and so on. In China, to an extent today, but so when we speak about regions, how regions of the world today, like Africa, some other parts of Asia, Latin and South America, they still need to develop, industrialize and so on. So does that mean also Middle East as well, although they have the wealth, the potential wealth, do these regions have to pass through the same thing? Although we have just witnessed that there is a possibility, for example, in Venezuela or Bolivia, that they can do that without destruction and death and so on.
Well, I think Leon Trotsky proposed the idea in 1905, along with a guy called Parvus, that capitalism in the richest countries in the world had developed to become overripe for revolution. They exported capital to poorer countries and extracted a super exploitation from those countries. They got the resource of Africa, India, Latin America, and plundered those people in order to acquire sufficient wealth, on the one side to acquire and expand their imperialist control of the world, and on the other, in order to exploit and maintain exploitation within the home countries. So it was a two-edged process. You expand your strength in the colonial world, and you also increase your wealth inside countries like Britain. And one aspect of that was to buy the leaders of the labour movement, buy the trade union leaders, buy the leaders of the Labour Party, and so on across the whole of Western Europe. And in that way pacify the working class. Now, the flip side to this is that Leon Trotsky proposed this idea that there would be revolution in backward countries first. because capitalism was not able to develop these countries, because the bourgeois, the capitalist class in Russia or China or India was too small, too weak. They were tied to the old feudal system. They were also tied to landowners. They had used religion an enormous amount. They didn't even have a national currency, many of these countries. And so the tasks which had been carried out in Britain or Germany or France or even the United States of America of developing industry and capitalism could not be carried out in these countries by the capitalists. And that's why the capitalists, because the capitalists that did exist in China or in India or in Africa, they were employing workers who, as soon as the workers went on strike, they considered them an enemy. And so they made an alliance with the chiefs or with the landlords or with the military to crush the workers, stop democratic rights, stop development, plunder as it was, and make an alliance with the imperialist powers. The consequence of that is that the idea developed that what you need to do is not have, because Lenin argued in 1917 that you would have a capitalist revolution in Russia. Sounds strange.
No, spread it around the world.
Lenin lived in England.
That's that international.
Lenin lived in England and advocated for Russia that there would be a capitalist revolution. And Lenin was to be his party was to lead a capitalist revolution to establish democracy, industrialize the country, and develop the working class so that they in future could establish socialism. But the capitalist class were too weak. And so when he made the revolution, they ran away, or they sided with the opposition, with the counter-revolution. And so he was compelled to annihilate capitalism. So what you have, therefore, is not a capitalist revolution, not a socialist revolution, but a combination of the two. The tasks of the socialist revolution and the capitalist revolution are combined. And Lenin explained this after he came to power. This is the dilemma they were confronted with. They had to, on the one side, develop all the tasks of capitalism.
In a backward country.
And on the other side, develop industry. But actually, even in the richest countries, they still have to eliminate elements of feudalism. For example, we have a monarchy in Britain, a House of Lords in Britain. We have landlordism in Britain, very powerful landlordism. We have a lot of landowners in Britain. 6,000 families own 47% of the land of this country.
Sir, you just